So we're gonna be covering up Nicholas's tattoo today. As you can see, it's right below his eye right here. And Nicholas has brought with him this Maybelline New York Fit Me concealer. He tells me that this is a pretty good shade match to his actual skin tone, but that it doesn't have enough coverage to cover up the tattoo. That makes sense because you're gonna need a color corrector to correct the undertone of the tattoo. Because with tattoos, you have a stronger undertone that will peek through than you have with, for instance, blemishes, a little bit of redness, a little bit of hyperpigmentation or melasma. If you have freckles or red pimples, those are a lot easier to cover than when you have a black tattoo that tends to have strong bluish undertones. So what you're gonna need to cover a tattoo is any concealer that matches your actual skin tone. But the key is to have a good color corrector underneath that to first cover the undertones of the tattoo. So for this look, I'm going to be taking the NARS Soft Matte Complete Concealer. And the reason I'm going in with the NARS Soft Matte Complete Concealer is because it's in a pot, which means it's a thicker consistency than something that's more liquidy and lighter coverage, such as the Maybelline concealer. It's also a more dry formula, so it's better for sticking onto that pigment as opposed to sliding around once you start to layer products on top. In the NARS Soft Matte Complete Concealer, I'm taking the shade Biscuit. As you can see, it has a peachy, orangey undertone. Now you're gonna wanna take any brush. I brought out a couple of options. It depends on the size of whatever it is you're covering up. Because Nick's tattoo here is more like a little spider web and it has some thin lines, I'm taking some thinner brushes so that I could be more precise. This one is one by Delium Tools. It's a 731 brush, and I'll give this to Nick for him to take. And you can also use, for instance, like this Kolinsky brush that I have here, the fine point, but still very soft. So I'm just first going into the Peach Color Corrector Concealer with the Delium Tools brush. As you can see, it's a good brush because it's nice and thin, and I'm going right along the lines of the concealer. I'm using this method as opposed to just covering up the entire tattoo, which you can do as well if you're in a rush. But this is just a better way to be more precise. So I recommend taking any little detail brush you have for this step to make sure that you're first covering up the tattoo with one fairly thick layer. Just like so. You see how that already makes a really big difference? Now, because you have a little bit of bleeding from the lines on the tattoo, you could dab around just to make sure it's kind of nice and blended in. I'm also teaching Nick how to do this on his own and showing him that it doesn't have to be difficult or intimidating. Now the next step will be to apply a little bit of powder. I brought a couple of options here. This is an Urban Decay pressed setting powder. Or you could take a loose setting powder, which I have here. As you can see, this loose setting powder has a little bit of an orangey yellow undertone, so it'll help cover up that blue undertone nicely as well. And I'm gonna be giving this to Nick to go, so I'm gonna be using the sponge that I have dampened prior to this. I'm teaching him how to dip the sponge into the loose setting powder like so. Just taking a little bit on the point of the sponge, and I'm just gonna lightly press in that color correcting shade. And then with the other side of the sponge, making sure it's nice and absorbed onto the skin. Now this is where you wanna take the concealer that matches his skin tone, because as you can see, you see a little bit of the orange color corrector there. So once you have a concealer that actually is a better match for your skin tone, as you can see, this one is a pretty good match for Nick. You're gonna wanna go back in with your beauty blender and blend that out right on top of that powder. The reason we powdered in between is to make sure that the color corrector underneath does not move around or slip and slide when you're layering it with more concealer that is an actual match for Nick's skin tone. And voila, as you can see, tattoo be gone. And that's how you cover up a tattoo. What do you think, Nick?
Looks a lot better.
If you want to go in with more, If throughout the day, for instance, you need a little bit of a touch up, now that you have that bottom layer covering up those strong undertones of that tattoo, it's really easy to just go ahead and add more. If Nick finds that throughout the day it's fading, all he has to do is carry that little concealer around in his pocket. He could even use his finger for this part, no big deal. If he's out and about and he doesn't have his beauty blender on him, you can just dab it with your finger as well. And if you find that it's not an absolute perfect match to the rest of your skin, no biggie, you can just go ahead and kind of spread around the area, kind of just make sure that that color is nice and blended in, and it'll look really natural. It's not going to look shiny, as you can see, because the powder that is underneath is already helping to mattify it, but it's also not too matte, because Nick expressed some concern that using that Maybelline concealer alone can tend to look dry and crusty throughout the day. So having a damp beauty blender on hand is a good way to freshen up if it starts to get dry or he starts to lose any of the coverage throughout the day. And that's a wrap.